Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a world of really specialized operations, one that demands not just high-tech equipment, but almost military-grade discipline. We're talking about drone inspection for critical linear infrastructure, specifically pipeline right-of-way or ROW patrols.
Wait, and this is not your typical drone job?
Not at all. This isn't a hobbyist's flight. It's a detailed, highly constrained, and absolutely vital industrial service. We are going way beyond camera specs and, the cool flying.
Good, because that's where people get hung up.
Exactly. Our deep dive today is focused entirely on the standardized operating procedures, the SOPs, the compliance rules, and just the sheer field discipline that transforms a basic flight into a professional, auditable inspection service. The kind of thing that liability teams absolutely rely on.
That's the perfect way to frame it. When we look at the source material, the most critical insight is realizing this is not just a flying assignment. Fundamentally, this is a change detection mission. A lot of new operators get fixated on flying smoothly, but that's secondary.
So the flying is just the means to an end.
Precisely. Every setup, every move, every piece of data captured has to serve one ultimate purpose, providing the client with actionable intelligence.
Right.
The entire value proposition delivered to the pipeline operator relies on answering 4 specific, non-negotiable questions.
And what are those?
What changed since the last patrol? Where exactly is the change located? How urgent is the threat? And what definitive evidence supports your claim?
Wow.
If you can't answer those 4 things with audit-proof documentation, then, frankly, the flight was just expensive entertainment.
And here's where we get to the core challenge. The major operational hurdle that seems to define this whole field. In the industry, they call it the corridor trap.
Ah, yes. The corridor trap, it's very real.
We are dealing with missions that are long, these linear corridors stretching for sometimes hundreds of miles. You might look at a map and think, okay, this is straightforward.
Looks easy on paper.
But the operational and safety risks are profoundly nonlinear. They change every few minutes. You're dealing with terrain that unexpectedly masks your radio signal, airspace boundaries that clip into controlled zones without warning, and constantly shifting, unpredictable interactions with the public on the ground.
It is incredibly easy to fall into what we call incremental failure, that slow, steady erosion of discipline that makes the whole mission non-compliant.
Exactly. It's the psychological component of the work, isn't it? You fly 5 safe miles, and your brain just starts to normalize the risk.
And the slow slide begins. That's when you see distance creep, where you push the visual line of sight just a little farther.
Right.
Or you get task saturation, where the monotony makes you miss that tiny helicopter passing low on the horizon. That is the corridor trap.
So our mission goal for you, the listener, is pretty robust today. You will gain the critical knowledge necessary to understand the regulatory anchors that define where you can fly and why the U.S. and Canadian rules demand completely different operational strategies.
A huge point of confusion for a lot of operators.
We'll also cover the discipline capture patterns that make your data actionable, and finally, the urgency triage system that expert operators use to achieve audit-proof success. You will leave this understanding why this work is fundamentally about professionalism and liability mitigation, not just flight hours.
And we're going to show you that the biggest failures, they happen on the ground before the rotors even start spinning.
Okay, let's unpack this. Part 1. Diving straight into the operational mindset and the core disciplines that define success on the right-of-way. Let's start with what you call the operational shift building the baseline. If this is a change detection mission, then flying the line is only valuable if the data is exactly comparable to the previous inspection.
Exactly.
This means every patrol must be repeatable. Can you walk us through the practical steps operators take to ensure that every flight segment A in March, segment A in April, uses the exact same altitude, angle, lateral spacing, and segment IDs?
Repeatability is. It's the most difficult and the most crucial discipline. It eliminates reviewer fatigue and, more importantly, risk ambiguity. We aren't aiming for close enough here.
Yeah.
We are aiming for near-perfect replication. So the first step is software discipline, planning software. Before the flight, every major pipeline operator will have defined the centerline coordinates and the required lateral offset.
The offset being how far to the left and right you need to see.
Right. Often it's 50 feet left and 50 feet right of the center, or maybe wider depending on what they need to cover.
So the flight path is literally a pre-programmed digital twin of the previous path.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If the previous mission used a fixed altitude of, say, 180 feet AGL above grain level and a 45-degree oblique camera angle pointing toward the center line, then the current mission must use those exact parameters.
Anchored to the same GPS coordinates.
Anchored to the exact GPS coordinates. And here's why. If the camera angle or altitude changes significantly between Patrol A and Patrol B, the reviewer has to spend hours trying to figure out if that new patch of disturbed soil is a real problem.
This is a new problem, or it's a different perspective on an old one. This subjectivity introduces risk, and it consumes massive amounts of client review time.
So the standardized baseline is designed specifically to make that crucial question, what changed? Obvious and immediate, almost automated.
Absolutely. Think of it this way, and this is an analogy we really stress to new pilots. Aero patrol is like finding a new crack in a windshield.
Okay.
It might be a tiny line today, but if you ignore it or if you can't prove exactly when it appeared, it's potentially catastrophic down the line.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a system that flags the crack the moment it starts, and that system relies on a perfectly consistent baseline.
That distinction is just crucial. Now, let's talk about the psychological side of this work, because pipelines are long and boredom is an insidious enemy. You identified the true enemies of corridor work as distance creep and task saturation.
Mm-hmm.
How do these two psychological factors compromise an otherwise compliant flight plan? They are the primary failure modes for inexperienced teams, and they feed each other. Long linear paths create this immense psychological temptation to go just a bit farther.
You want to be efficient.
You're trying to maximize productivity, right? And that leads to distance creep, that slow, silent slide into a visual line of sight or VLOS violation. The pilot rationalizes it. They say, the video looks perfect, or I can still see the shape of the drone, which is often a lie.
Right. And that's compounded by the other enemy.
Yes, by task saturation, which is the inability to process new information because you are too focused on the primary job, following the line or getting the shot.
It's the normalization of deviance, really. And you have a great litmus test for catching yourself in this trap. You call it the VLOS lie detector.
I do.
What exactly is that internal warning sign we should be listening for?
The VLOS lie detector is critical because it forces honesty about compliance. The warning signs are those little internal justifications you make.
Like what?
If you find yourself saying, I can kind of see it, or worse, the video looks fine, so I'm fine, you are likely compromising compliance. We have to be crystal clear. VLOS is not about the clarity of the camera feed.
That's a huge point.
VLOS is about the unaided visual observation of physical aircraft. That observation must allow the pilot, or the visual observer, the VO, to maintain constant, confident awareness of its location, its altitude, attitude, direction, and surrounding hazards.
So if I'm concentrating on the screen to capture a perfect oblique shot of a trench, and I can technically see the drone out of my peripheral vision, but I can't confidently determine its direction of flight or if a bird is approaching it, am I non-compliant?
Absolutely. 100%. You've lost the necessary situational awareness, or SA.
Yeah.
Your eyes are the legal sensor. The camera is merely the payload providing the data. If you've lost the ability to confidently determine orientation and direction at a glance, or if you can't instantaneously spot and evade an unexpected low-flying helicopter, you must stop forward progress, land, or reposition. That momentary lapse of SA is where the risk is highest.
That distinction between the legal requirement and just screen fixation is paramount. Let's move now to the prerequisite hurdles before you ever launch, the 3 buckets of permission.
Yes.
We often assume if the client hired us, we have carte blanche. But on a pipeline ROW, that is a dangerous, dangerous assumption. Why do so many projects fail? Because operators assume the first yes covers everything.
It's a common and critical misunderstanding that exposes both the contractor and the client to massive liability. the client's right-of-way easement that grants them the legal right to access and maintain the line on the land.
Right.
But that easement absolutely does not automatically grant you, the drone operator, the legal right to use the airspace above it. Nor does it override strict rules regarding public privacy or restricted airspace. The job requires 3 separate confirmed authorizations. If any one of those buckets is empty, you cannot launch.
Lay out those 3 buckets for us and maybe the specific failure mode for each one.
Okay. First, you need client easement land access. This just confirms you have the pipeline operator's explicit permission to be on their property or within their easement. Failure here means trespassing or violating landowner rights,
which can lead to confrontation and mission termination.
Instantly.
Okay, that one seems obvious. What's the second, maybe harder one?
Second, you need airspace compliance. This is where things get really complex, especially near population centers or even small regional airports. This covers controlled airspace,
which requires specific ATC authorization.
Right, often via LANC in the US or NAV drone in Canada. It also covers temporary flight restrictions, TFRs, and any other critical infrastructure restrictions. This is a hard compliance gate. You absolutely cannot substitute the client's land access permission for airspace permission. If the FAA or Transport Canada says no, the pipeline client's permission means nothing.
And the third bucket, this speaks to the data itself.
The third bucket is privacy-sensitive infrastructure handling. Your high-resolution camera will inevitably capture homes, backyards, license plates, people, or restricted facilities adjacent to the ROW. You must have a clear, pre-approved protocol for data security, retention, and how to treat potentially sensitive imagery. This includes procedures for immediate deletion of personally identifiable information if the client's policy requires it.
So assuming that first bucket covers the other 2 is the big mistake.
It leaves the other 2 empty, making the operation illegal or exposing both parties to massive future liability.
That complexity of dealing with people and property connects directly to the next critical field constraint, operational constraint, people, not battery.
Yes.
Intuitively, a pilot thinks battery endurance or link range is the biggest operational hurdle. But you argue the number 1 constraint is often public interaction.
It's the most common surprise for new crews. I mean, you look at the drone's published specs, the range is massive, the endurance is 45 minutes. It looks easy.
Right.
But the field reality is that people, whether they're curious bystanders, hikers, hunters, farm workers, or just road traffic, they are unpredictable and non-linear. And they necessitate regulatory standoffs.
Right. In many jurisdictions, like Canada, you have a strict 30-meter minimum horizontal standoff requirement from non-participants. That's about 100 feet.
And that 30-meter rule changes everything about mission management.
How so?
Well, if you are flying a 50-foot wide ROW and an unsuspecting person walks within 100 feet of your aircraft's path, you must immediately adjust course, pause the mission, or often land entirely.
You can't just fly over them.
Absolutely not. If you design a mission, assuming a clean, empty corridor, you will be crushed in the field. Public interaction constantly forces pilots to stand down, reposition the crew, wait for traffic to clear, or engage politely with a curious landowner. Every one of those interactions forces a non-productive pause that just destroys your mission speed and efficiency.
And since corridor flights, by their very nature, can be monotonous, this leads to human factors and role rotation becoming a necessity. How do professional teams counteract that monotony that causes task saturation and mistakes?
Monotony is a proven safety risk. The brain starts filtering out the routine and stops scanning for the novel hazard. So the solution is high discipline and role rotation.
Okay.
If you have a 2- or 3-person crew, you rotate the roles regularly. The eyes-up spotter, who the visual observer or VO, the camera or payload operator, and the pilot flying the primary route.
So nobody gets stuck in one job for too long.
Exactly. This rotation maintains high cognitive engagement. No one is allowed to zone out because they know they're switching jobs in 15 minutes.
And you combine this rotation with segmentation of the mission itself.
Yes. We use short defined flight segments, maybe 300 to 600 meters in length, and they're followed by a mandatory 5-minute micro debrief.
A micro debrief.
These mandatory check-ins force the crew to stop, confirm compliance. Are we still VLOS? Review data quality. Did we capture the necessary wide, medium, tight sequence for that encroachment? And just reset their focus before moving on to the next segment.
So the shorter the mission chunk, the less chance for the corridor trap to set in.
That's the idea.
Finally, in this operational section, we have to discuss the criticality of link loss planning. Corridors present unique radio frequency challenges that differ dramatically from flying over, say, a wide open field.
They absolutely do. Pipeline corridors, especially in rolling terrain or heavily wooded areas, are notorious for two major link issues.
What are they?
First, terrain masking. Even a small hill or a dip in the ground between the controller and the drone can completely block the line-of-sight RF signal path. Just gone.
And the second one?
The second is the dreaded tree wall effect. When you fly parallel to a dense line of mature trees, which is a common feature on OKW borders, the radio waves suffer from multipath interference and signal absorption. It severely degrades reliability.
So trying to push 500 meters parallel to a thick tree line is often far riskier than flying a full kilometer over an open field.
Much riskier.
I can hear the nervous drone pilot asking, so how do I plan for link loss when the terrain is actively trying to block my signal?
You need redundant planning. It has to address three non-negotiable elements. First, a conservative RTH altitude, return to home.
Right.
This altitude has to be set high enough to clear the tallest known obstacles in the entire segment, not just at the takeoff point, but the tallest tree or tower along the whole flight path, plus a generous safety buffer.
So if the tallest tree is 150 feet, maybe you set RTH at 250 feet.
At least. It must be safe, but not absurd. If it's too high, you risk entering manned traffic areas and you just waste battery.
What's the second element?
Second, deliberate lost link behavior. This has to be preset and agreed upon by the crew. Do you want the aircraft to immediately initiate RTH, or hover and wait for the signal to come back, or just land vertically? That behavior has to be appropriate for the density of the area below.
And the third element is the containment area.
Yes, and this is the most crucial for pipeline work. A pre-briefed containment area. You have to define a volume of airspace where the drone is allowed to go if things go completely wrong.
A safety bubble.
Essentially. If the drone loses link and the GPS is degraded, you need to know that any unpredictable movements will still keep the drone within an acceptable non-hazardous volume away from roads, restricted facilities, or populated neighborhoods. Planning for catastrophic failure is mandatory on critical infrastructure.
That's fascinating. It highlights how the plan for failure has to be just as detailed as the plan for success.
It has to be more detailed.
So if we understand the operational discipline, that dictates the safety rules on the ground. But the border changes everything in the air, which brings us to part two. Okay, let's unpack this. Flying legally means the border changes your whole strategy. And that's particularly true when you're dealing with infrastructure that spans huge distances or is managed by companies with assets on both sides.
It's a whole different ballgame depending on where you are.
Let's start with the USA framework, specifically Part 107.
Okay, the USA framework, overseen by the FAA, centers entirely on the Part 107 rules for commercial small unmanned aircraft system operators, or SUAS. The VLOS standard is the absolute foundational requirement.
Visual line of sight.
Exactly. The remote pilot or the visual observer has to maintain unaided visual line of sight throughout the entire flight. This is the baseline, the default.
And if you want to fly outside of that line of sight, the process is notoriously difficult, correct?
It is. Beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS, is typically pursued via a waiver under Part 107. And that is a massive regulatory undertaking.
Why is it difficult?
Because you have to present a detailed, approved safety case that proves the operation can be conducted safely without constant visual observation. This usually involves sophisticated technology like detect and avoid systems, extremely detailed operational manuals, and extensive flight testing.
So it's achievable, but it's not a casual decision.
Not at all. It requires significant investment and regulatory coordination.
And whether you are VLOS or BVLOS, the most immediate and non-negotiable compliance gate, regardless of how rural the ROW feels, is controlled airspace.
That is a hard stop. Under Part 107, operation in controlled airspace, that's classes B, C, D, and surface E, is strictly prohibited without prior air traffic control, ATC, authorization.
No exceptions?
None. You cannot launch, transit, or land in that airspace without that authorization. For most operations, this is obtained pretty quickly and efficiently via LA&C.
The low-altitude authorization and notification capability.
Or via the FAA's drone zone.
For our listeners who may not deal with LA&C daily, can you walk us through the actual workflow? What does checking airspace for the entire linear path look like on the ground?
Sure. This is where segment math meets regulatory reality. Before you even drive to the site, you pull up the sectional charts. You plot your entire linear path, let's say it's 15 miles, and then you overlay the controlled airspace rings.
And what might you find?
You might find that your first two segments are clear. But Segment 3 clips the approach and departure corridor of a small Class D airport at 100 feet AGL.
Ah.
If you only requested LANC authorization for your takeoff point, that third segment is illegal. You have to plot the entire path and ensure you have authorization for the highest altitude required in every square meter of that path.
And if it's granted, you still have to comply with the ceilings they give you.
Absolutely. Non-compliance here is an immediate FAA violation.
And Part 107 recently tightened the screws on accountability for all commercial pilots with remote ID.
Remote ID is now a non-preventable operational failure point for U.S. commercial work. Its function is basically broadcasting a license plate.
A digital license plate.
Right. It broadcasts the drone's identity, its location, and the control station's location during flight. And while the rules were phased in, the critical date was March 16, 2024. That's when FAA enforcement discretion ended.
So for any commercial operation requiring aircraft registration, remote ID is now mandatory.
It is mandatory.
What's the practical consequence for a pipeline operator if they fly a non-compliant drone today?
Well, they risk an immediate field termination of the mission, seizure of the aircraft for evidence, and then a subsequent investigation by the FAA.
So not a small deal.
Not at all. Utility and infrastructure work often attracts scrutiny from both regulators and the public. You must ensure your entire fleet is compliant. Non-compliance is not an option. It immediately voids the safety case and subjects the pilot to enforcement action.
Okay, switching gears. Let's move north to the Canada framework. CRs, regulated by Transport Canada. What are the foundational limits that shape mission planning differently up there?
The Canadian Aviation Regulations, or CARs, set some strict, yet often more functionally flexible, foundational limits for small, remotely piloted aircraft systems, or RPAS.
So the general limit is max 400 feet AGL, right? About 122 meters.
Correct. That's standard across the board. But the rule that dramatically shapes ROW work is that 30-meter or 100-foot minimum horizontal standoff from non-participants.
And that's for standard VLOS operations.
Right, unless you're operating under permitted alternate rules.
That 30-meter rule sounds like a continuous minute-by-minute constraint. How does that practically affect flying a pipeline through, say, a semi-urban area?
It means constant vigilance. If the pipeline is only 15 meters from a residential backyard and someone steps outside for a barbecue,
you have a problem.
Your drone must either be flying high enough that they aren't considered a non-participant, which is a whole other definition, or you must terminate the segment, land, and wait for them to leave. You cannot fly over the fence line, and you cannot operate within that 30-meter bubble of a non-participant.
So it demands absolute discipline in managing public interaction.
It reinforces why mission planning has to prioritize avoidance, not reaction.
Now, here's the key difference for long linear patrols. Canada has the extended visual line of sight, or EVLOS, concept built into its standard framework. The U.S. mainly manages this through that complex BVLOS waiver process. Tell us about the EVLOS advantage.
EVLOS is a game changer for long corridors. It really showcases a fundamental difference in regulatory philosophy. While the U.S. waiver focuses heavily on technology.
The detect and avoid systems.
Exactly. Canada's EVLOS focuses on procedural control and crew competency. EVLOS expands the operational box when you use a trained and certified visual observer, or VO, who maintains constant communication with the pilot.
So how far can you stretch the patrol box out under this framework?
When you're operating under the EVLOS framework in uncontrolled airspace, you can stretch the patrol box out significantly, up to 3.7 kilometers, which is 2 nautical miles relative to the crew.
Wow.
This allows a team to cover vast distances without having to constantly tear down and set up the launch site like you often have to in strict U.S. VLOS operations.
So it trades constant pilot repositioning for what?
For highly disciplined communication protocols between the pilot and the VO, who has to use high-powered binoculars and strict reporting discipline to maintain situational awareness of the aircraft.
That seems like a massive efficiency gain. If I'm a U.S. operator, what's the biggest headache about trying to achieve the functional equivalent of EVLOS compared to the Canadian framework? Is it just paperwork?
It's fundamentally harder because of the technology requirement. In the U.S., getting that kind of range usually means a BVLOS waiver, which requires expensive, proven detect and avoid technology and a very specific safety case focused on that gear.
Whereas the Canadian EVLOS is more human-centric.
Exactly. It relies heavily on human procedural discipline, clear sightlines, and certified training. It's a lower barrier to entry for highly productive linear inspection services.
And this framework is continually evolving. Tell us about the recent BVLOS expansion for 2025 and 2026.
This is major progress that reflects the industry's maturation. Transport Canada's new framework for lower-risk BVLOs and streamlined EVLI operations became operationally viable on November 4th, 2025.
And what does that mean for operators?
It means a lower regulatory barrier for eligible operators who have achieved new pilot certifications, like the Level 1 Complex certificate, and hold the appropriate operational certificate. This change specifically acknowledges that pipeline and utility corridor work is one of the biggest value cases for efficient beyond VLO's operations.
So they're trying to standardize the practice.
Right, moving it out of the domain of special one-off permits.
Before we leave Canada, you emphasize a very strict rule related to safety that RotoB pilots have to internalize: the emergency perimeter risk.
This is non-negotiable and has immense liability implications. The strict Canadian rule is that operating over or within an emergency security perimeter set by any public authority, police, fire services, Coast Guard, is generally prohibited.
So if there's a leak or a fire near your ROW segment,
and responders establish a perimeter, your mission must stop immediately. You cannot fly near, over, or into an active scene, even if your client thinks the drone footage would be helpful.
So your SOPs have to have a clear plan for that.
A clear addendum on how to immediately stand down your incidents to avoid adding complexity or risk to an active emergency scene.
Finally, operationally, the tools of the trade differ too.
Briefly, yes. The workflow is split at the border. Canadian operators primarily use NE Canada's NE drone web tools for planning and requesting authorizations in controlled airspace.
Since NE Canada is the air traffic services provider there.
Right. And USA operators rely on the FAA authorization processes, primarily LAANC and the drone zone. Both frameworks demand that you check and comply, but the practical digital process changes entirely depending on which side of the border you are flying.
That deep dive into the regulatory dichotomy really emphasizes that compliance isn't a suggestion. It's the foundation of the whole operation.
Absolutely.
And once we nail the air piece, the real risk often shifts to the ground and the immediate airspace around you. Which brings us to part 3. Moving into part 3, let's focus on safety, which means, counterintuitively, spending less time looking at the beautiful video feed and more time scanning the sky. We have to start with a surprising fact. Low-level manned aircraft risk is higher than people assume in rural right-of-way areas.
This is a critical point that novice pilots often overlook. They assume if they're outside controlled airspace and away from a major airport, they are alone. They are wrong.
Why? What's out there?
RWs are linear magnets for several categories of low-altitude manned aircraft. You have pipeline patrol helicopters, which fly predictable low patterns.
Right.
You have mid-vac roads, which often use linear features like highways and pipelines for navigation.
Okay.
And critically, you have agricultural aircraft, crop dusters. They operate seasonally, but they are dangerously fast and low, and they're often not talking to anyone on a common frequency.
I can just imagine the shock of being fixated on your screen and suddenly having a fast-moving aircraft appear below your altitude ceiling.
It's a terrifying moment, and it happens more often than you would think. The reality is that low-level manned aircraft are typically flying at higher speeds and can appear in your operational box with virtually no warning.
So the mitigation here has to be absolute. What is the non-negotiable discipline required?
The practical absolute rule is that one person's job is eyes-up scanning at all times. We're not talking about a casual glance. We mean dedicated, continuous scanning of the immediate airspace and the horizon. If you have a crew, the visual observer, the VO, is the primary safety sensor for the sky and the immediate ground area, and they have to be equipped with the means binoculars, communication gear to execute that job effectively.
And if you are flying solo, which is often necessary for smaller operations.
If you are solo, you have to build frequent, non-negotiable scan breaks into your flight rhythm, say every 5 to 10 seconds. You fly a short burst, you stop the aircraft's forward movement, you scan the sky and the ground, and then you continue.
Because the corridor trap wants you to focus on the monitor.
It wants you to focus hard on the monitor to get the perfect shot of that anomaly. That intense fixation is exactly the moment your situational awareness drops to zero, and that's when risk materializes.
That attention discipline leads directly to the stop rules, the non-negotiable triggers that must be memorized and acted upon instantly. If a pilot feels rushed, they are going too fast. What are the essential non-negotiables that require an immediate stop?
These are the rules that protect your certificate, your client's asset, and public safety. Forward progress must stabilize, land, or reposition if any of these 4 things occur.
Let's start with the one related to human factors.
First, you lose true situational awareness or cannot confidently determine orientation. If the drone's just a speck, If you're guessing its attitude or direction, or if you have to ask yourself, wait, where is it? You've lost SA. You land immediately.
Okay, what's second?
Second, continuous eyes-up scanning stops. If everyone on the crew is staring at the screen trying to capture a close-up, the mission is temporarily compromised. Someone must be the designated safety watch, and if they lose focus, you stop.
And the regulatory triggers.
Third, non-participants enter your operational bubble. This means road traffic, curious bystanders, workers, or animals getting too close. If you cannot maintain the required safe separation, remember that 30-meter standoff in Canada or the required separation in the U.S., you land. You don't try to fly over them, you land.
And number 4.
Fourth, link quality degrades significantly. That means latency, intermittent video, or control warnings. You don't try to push through it to finish the segment. The moment control reliability is in question, you initiate your lost link procedure or land manually.
And the biggest immediate risk.
Finally, the absolute non-negotiable. You spot manned aircraft approaching low. The call must be immediate and absolute. Hold, descend, or land now. You yield the airspace immediately, no questions asked. The moment you feel rushed or panicked, that's your brain telling you that you are outside your safe operating zone and you must stabilize.
The stop rules prevent that distance creep we discussed earlier. And the solution to avoiding that creep is planning the flight not as one long line, but through corridor flight planning. Segment math.
The segmentation model is the core operational discipline for linear missions, especially VLS and EVLS. Instead of mentally planning a 10-kilometer patrol, you must break the job down into segment A, segment B, segment C, and so on.
So each segment is a short, digestible mission in itself.
Exactly.
What dictates the appropriate segment length?
For standard VLOS operations, a normal operational segment range is typically 300 to 800 meters per launch setup in open, flat conditions.
But in rough terrain,
In rough, hilly terrain or heavy tree cover, that range might shrink conservatively to 150 to 400 meters. The segment length is dictated by two factors: maintaining VLOS and maximizing crew productivity without hitting task saturation.
and what needs to be rigorously defined for each of these segments?
Everything. Each segment needs its own defined takeoff point latitude, longitude, a specific landing point, a list of known hazards like road crossings, power lines, towers, and a hard stop distance.
So it builds compliance right into the plan.
Right. You literally cannot fly beyond the designated coordinates for segment B without physically moving the ground crew and starting segment C. This segment math is what makes the mission traceable, successful, and crucially, perfectly repeatable for future change detection.
Moving on to sensor use, let's discuss the role of thermal discipline. Thermal sensors are essential tools for pipeline inspection, looking for temperature variations, but they are incredibly easy to oversell and misread.
That is the ultimate caveat for thermal imagery. It is a high liability tool. The professional must treat thermal use solely as a tool for flagging anomalies, not diagnosing the root cause.
So what does that mean in practice?
The sensor highlights unusual heat patterns, cold spots from fluid evaporation, or stressed vegetation patterns. The sensor flags, but the ground team diagnoses.
You mentioned that false positives are extremely common. What are the common environmental factors that create these anomalies that have nothing to do with the pipe?
Oh, the list is long, and ignoring it leads to wasted ground crew time. False positives occur due to massive variations in environmental conditions. Sunloading a rock absorbing and radiating heat compared to shaded soil wind chill effects, variations in soil moisture retention.
So wet ground stays colder longer.
Exactly. And changes in vegetation type over the ROBU. You might see a massive thermal differential simply because a section of ground has less protective ground cover.
So a professional report must only claim what the sensor can truly support.
You flag a suspected thermal anomaly requiring ground confirmation. You do not send a report claiming leak confirmed. Credibility is built by staying inside the evidence.
That discipline described, don't diagnose, sounds like the key differentiator between an expert and an amateur.
It absolutely is. We are an early warning system, not an integrity engineering team. What's fascinating here is that we often talk about the technology of flight, but your real product is not the high-definition video. It's actionable findings.
Right.
If you fly perfectly but you produce unusable evidence, the mission is a failure in the eyes of the client.
That makes perfect sense. If a ground crew has to spend an hour hunting through video trying to figure out where that fresh bucket scar is, you failed your client by consuming their valuable time.
Exactly.
That brings us to the required evidence capture sequence, the wide, medium, E tight capture pattern.
This sequence is mandatory for every single finding because it builds context and traceability. And that is exactly what response crews need before they mobilize. Think of it like a police photographer documenting a crime scene.
You establish the context first, then move to the detail.
Precisely.
Can you walk us through those 3 layers and the purpose of each?
Certainly. Layer 1 is wide. This shot is purely for context and location. It has to show the anomaly with surrounding landmarks, roads, power line crossings, major tree lines, or veld sites.
So the reviewer can immediately place it on their map.
If they can't, the data is useless.
Then we zoom in.
Layer 2 is medium. This clearly shows the feature itself, the excavation area, the washout, the staged equipment, or the physical sign of encroachment. This confirms the existence and the scale of the threat. It allows the ground crew to mentally prep for what equipment they might need.
And finally,
Layer 3 is tight or detail. This zooms in to show the critical detail. Bucket scars, the texture of disturbed soil, a missing marker post, or a specific piece of equipment's license plate. This level of detail concerns the nature of the immediate threat. And finally, you have to tag it immediately with coordinates, timestamp, and the segment ID.
now a professional tip you shared was regarding the angle of capture. We often assume nadir, straight down, is best, but you prioritize oblique shots for certain findings. Why is that?
This is a massive pro tip that saves hours in remediation planning. While nadir shots are great for pure mapping and inventory, oblique shots taken at an angle, typically 45 to 60 degrees, often reveal crucial indicators better than straight-down imagery.
Especially for subtle ground movement.
Yes, nadir shots can hide small changes in elevation. Oblique angles clearly reveal ruts left by equipment, slope deformation, the presence of low equipment staging, and disturbed soil texture far more clearly because they rely on shadows and relief to define depth.
This traceability is key. Proof of location and time is non-negotiable. Why does losing track of segment IDs make the data unusable?
Because pipelines are linear assets, and their integrity data is almost always managed within a GIS, geographic information system anchored to a mile marker or kilometer post system.
So without that traceability,
the data loses all operational value. For every finding, the documentation has to answer, where is it? When was it captured? Which segment or mile marker are we looking at? And what direction were you looking? If a client reviewer has to spend 15 minutes correlating a segment ID from your metadata to a massive map file, they will lose confidence in the entire patrol.
and to really build credibility, you need the discipline to know what to escalate immediately versus what can wait for the final report. That's where the urgency ladder with tiers 1, 2, and 3 comes in.
This formalized triage process is absolutely essential. We are trying to avoid the crying wolf scenario.
Yeah.
Your credibility is built not just by finding things, but by escalating only the right things quickly and avoiding speculation.
Right. If you treat a minor marker wear issue the same way you treat an active excavator,
You erode trust.
let's define the highest level of urgency. What constitutes a tier 1 call immediately, minutes, item?
These are findings that pose an imminent threat of asset strike, release, or a public safety hazard that could realistically materialize before the end-of-day report is even delivered.
So the moment you spot these,
You stop the flight, land, and call the client's emergency line now. Examples include active third-party excavation or equipment working directly near the corridor. You see the bucket swinging.
okay.
Fresh ground disturbance or trenching that strongly suggests very recent unauthorized digging and a credible strike risk. An obvious public safety hazard like a fire, a spill, or signs of rupture, or a major washout or landslide actively threatening to expose the pipe. If emergency responders are establishing a scene, that's also Tier 1.
These are drop everything situations. What about issues that need timely attention but don't carry that imminent strike risk? There should be tier 2, notify same day, hours, items.
Tier 2 requires documented follow-up but doesn't warrant an immediate emergency call. These are issues that need timely remediation. Examples include things like new encroachment signs, a new shed foundation being laid, or equipment staged but idle showing an intent to dig. Moderate progressing erosion that needs to be remediated within the week. Missing signage, a critical road, or stream crossings that pose a long-term public risk. Or access blockage, like a downed tree that would delay response crews during a real incident.
And these are communicated the same day.
Via a short, targeted finding card to the mission contact.
And finally, the administrative things that still matter for long-term tracking, tier 3, report only, next cycle.
Tier 3 findings are important for long-term integrity tracking and inventory, but they don't require immediate action. They're logged in the database for the next patrol cycle. Examples would be minor vegetation regrowth, non-critical access road rutting, or minor wear on permanent markers. They just roll into the final written report. No immediate call is necessary.
To ensure that urgent communication is tight, efficient, and avoids that fatal error of speculation, how do professionals standardize that notification?
You must use a finding card template. This prevents the common mistake of sending a long, rambling text message with unverified information. The card format keeps the communication extremely focused.
What does it include?
It has to include the urgency level, the precise location, the time, a 1 to 2 sentence observation, crucially, with no speculation, and a recommended action, like dispatch field check or monitor next patrol. That discipline of describing only what the evidence shows is what maintains professional credibility. When you look at what separates the one-off contractor from the long-term partner, it's not just about flying the line efficiently. Success is measured in 5 core dimensions: safety, compliance, evidence, speed, and, the most overlooked, professionalism.
Let's start with customer expectations beyond flying, specifically regarding safety culture. What do pipeline operators expect to see on the ground that proves you are a professional partner?
They expect a safety culture that feels real, not just performative. They want to see a clear separation plan in place around roads, bystanders, and work crews. They expect you to use stop work authority and actually use it when safety is compromised.
So they're judging you on whether you reduce their risk profile or add distraction.
Exactly. This includes adopting the attitude of no hero moves.
What exactly is a hero move in row patrol, and why is it dangerous?
A hero move is attempting to push the battery or the link range limit by 1 minute just to complete a segment, rather than landing early and repositioning. It's prioritizing speed over risk mitigation.
Right.
A $25,000 drone lost in the woods because you tried to save 3 minutes of setup time is catastrophic. Customers expect you to land early and reposition. It demonstrates that you prioritize asset protection and regulatory compliance over marginal time savings.
Next up is the administrative side of sensitivity: data governance. Pipeline data is highly sensitive for security reasons. What specific security protocols do clients expect from their drone partners?
They expect you to treat the data like controlled information, sometimes akin to financial or even military data. This requires secure storage using encrypted drives, ensuring strict access control only for authorized personnel. You must have clear retention protocols, knowing exactly how long to keep raw footage versus process finding reports as required by the client's legal department. And perhaps most critical, a strict prohibition on posting imagery to social media.
Why is that social media rule such a massive liability point?
Posting photos of infrastructure, even benign ones, can reveal security weaknesses, operational procedures, or critical locations of valves and crossings. Pipeline operators need a clean, auditable chain of custody for any incident-related imagery. Any data that escapes that secure environment compromises their entire security and compliance framework.
So data discipline is just as critical as flight discipline.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to the final deliverable, what defines clean reporting? Clients don't want hours of video. They want decisions, and they want traceability.
They want reports that save them time, which means they have to be structured hierarchically. The report should be skimmable in 3 minutes for the executive summary and traceable in 30 seconds for any individual finding. If they have to hunt through a PDF to find the location of an anomaly, you have failed.
So what are the gold standard deliverables that enable that kind of traceability?
The standard set of deliverables should always include 3 things. First, a findings register table. A simple, sortable database output listing the location, finding type, urgency tier, and coordinates of every anomaly.
Easy to audit and compare month to month.
Right. Second, an annotated map, often delivered as KMZ or GeoPDF pins, which can be imported directly into the client's existing GIS system. They need to be able to click a pin and see your evidence pop up immediately.
And third,
a clean flight log summary showing segments completed and confirmation of data quality. If you make them hunt for evidence, you lose trust quickly.
That attention to detail is critical. And in the field, what does the gold standard in field execution look like to a pipeline client?
It's all about professional field behavior and maintaining public confidence. This means wearing high-visibility safety gear, having a clean, organized setup, and crucially, managing public interaction calmly and transparently.
So crews need to have a one-liner ready.
Exactly. Something like, "Hi, we're doing a mandatory safety inspection for the pipeline operator. We'll be done in a few minutes and we'll ensure we keep well clear of you in your property." The goal is minimizing public complaints and reducing confusion.
And what's the most valuable organizational move that sets a truly professional team apart from the pack?
It's the immediacy of communication and transparency regarding obstacles. delivering a one-page daily patrol summary the same day you fly.
The same day.
The same day. This summary outlines segments completed, major findings for Tier 1 and 2, and critically anything that was not completed and why. Like Segment 4, blocked due to unexpected active farming equipment, postponed until 1400 tomorrow. And then the next recommended steps.
So it makes you look organized, reliable, and easy to manage.
It demonstrates that you are actively managing their risk profile, not just flying a schedule.
This has been an incredibly detailed look into what it takes to operate professionally on critical linear infrastructure. Our deep dive today really emphasized that mastering drone ROW patrol is not about having the fastest aircraft. It's about operational discipline. It's about flying in clear segments to avoid that corridor trap, strictly adhering to regulatory differences, whether you're under Part 107 in the US or CARS in Canada, and most critically, exercising disciplined triage of findings.
I want to reinforce that. Professionalism and audit-proof documentation are the non-negotiables that determine success in this industry. You are the pipeline operator's reliable early warning system, and that means every piece of captured context matters because operationally, context beats close-ups.
Right.
Knowing exactly where and when an anomaly occurred, supported by wide, medium, and tight shots, is far more valuable to a remediation crew than the sharpest possible image of the anomaly itself without that location data. That documentation is your liability shield.
And as you reflect on the complexity of maintaining critical infrastructure across these vast linear distances, consider this. The corridor trap, that slow slide into distance creep, task saturation, and normalizing risk, applies just as much to long-term projects in your own career as it does to a drone patrol.
That's a great point.
How do you segment your own long-term goals and set stop rules to prevent creeping into unmanageable territory? That's something for you to mull or explore on your own.
A critical question indeed. Discipline is transferable.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.